What if I told you there's a pattern in the Bible that proves God blessed Abraham's two sons equally, but it's been ignored for thousands of years? A pattern so obvious, once you see it, you can't unsee it. Everyone knows about Israel's 12 tribes, Jacob's 12 sons who became the foundation of the Jewish people. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. These 12 sons formed the 12 tribes of Israel, foundational to all of biblical history. But here's what nobody talks about. Genesis 25 verses 13 through 16 lists Ishmael's sons: Nebaioth, Kedar, Adbeel, Mibsam, Mishma, Dumah, Massa, Hadad, Tema, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedemah. Count them, 12 sons, and the text explicitly calls them 12 princes according to their nations. 12 sons, 12 princes, 12 tribes, 12 nations. This is not coincidence. This is divine parallel structure. God gave both of Abraham's sons the exact same blessing. 12 tribal founders, 12 nations, identical structure. So here's the question. If God blessed both sons equally, giving them identical structure, why does traditional interpretation treat one as legitimate and the other as a mistake? Why is Isaac's line the chosen one, while Ismael's line is dismissed as illegitimate? The answer? Someone rewrote the story. And Scripture itself admits it. Jeremiah 8:8. The false pen of the scribes has made it into a lie. This 12 sons parallel is just the beginning. In this series, we'll uncover how scribes deliberately erased Ismael's legitimacy, and why. We'll meet the princess they turned into a servant, the obedient son they called wild, and we'll discover geographic evidence they couldn't erase. Subscribe so you don't miss what they tried to hide. Remember Abraham's restoration? He rejected things that set, including false hierarchies. Hagar's story is part of that restoration, but the scribes rewrote it to create hierarchy where Abraham created partnership. Traditional interpretation says Hagar was just Sarah's Egyptian servant, a slave who got uppity. But ancient traditions, and the biblical text itself, tell a very different story. Hagar was Egyptian royalty, and Abraham treated her accordingly. The scribes later rewrote this partnership as servitude, and that changed everything. Hagar was a princess, a daughter of Pharaoh himself. Islamic tradition specifically identifies her as the daughter of Pharaoh, given to Sarah as a gesture of honor after Pharaoh realized Sarah was Abraham's wife. This wasn't a slave transaction. This was a royal diplomatic gift, one princess to another. This means Hagar, a princess, chose to serve Sarah out of obedience and respect. She left her royal status, a thing that sets, that rises and falls, to serve something eternal, Abraham's restoration mission. This wasn't forced servitude. This was profound humility, an act of devotion to truth over status. Modern science confirms that women in close physical and emotional proximity can influence each other's hormonal cycles through pheromones and shared environmental factors. This is called menstrual synchrony, or the McClintock effect. For Hagar's pregnancy to catalyze Sarah's conception after decades of barrenness, they would need to be together constantly, eating together, sleeping in close quarters, sharing daily intimate life. This level of closeness isn't mistress-servant. It's sisterhood. This was deep friendship, intimate companionship. Two women united in Abraham's restoration mission. Hagar's fertility awakened Sarah's, a divine miracle that required human intimacy as its vessel. This is a biological spiritual bond that only makes sense if they were incredibly close. God worked through their friendship, not despite their hierarchy. And notice when this contempt supposedly appears, immediately after conception. Convenient, isn't it? The moment Hagar fulfills her role in Abraham's line, suddenly she's a problem. The moment she becomes mother of nations, she must be marginalized. This isn't history. This is agenda. This is character assassination. The scribes needed to justify this, so they used sending Hagar away as proof of her haughtiness. They turned a sacred friendship into a rivalry. They transformed collaboration into competition. They made a princess into a problem. And notice the pattern. Every woman associated with Ishmael's line gets slandered. Hagar becomes haughty. Later, the Keturah tradition that connects to Arabian lineages gets minimized. Any threat to Isaac-only supremacy gets rewritten. They erased her royalty. They destroyed her friendship with Sarah. They fabricated contempt to justify exclusion. They turned Abraham's restoration partnership into hierarchical servitude. But the evidence remains for those willing to see it. Hagar was a princess who rejected status to serve truth. The scribes couldn't erase that completely. Here's something the traditional narrative can't explain. When Hagar fled into the wilderness, the angel of the Lord appeared to her and revealed the secret name El, and Hagar called God Elroy, meaning the God who sees me. She is the only person in the entire Bible who names God. Not Abraham, not Moses, not David. A supposed servant, a slave, gave God a name. Does that sound like someone insignificant? Or does it sound like someone with authority, intimacy with the divine, and spiritual sophistication? Sarah waited over 60 years for a child. 60 years. Decade after decade of barrenness, watching others have children, holding on to an impossible promise. She finally bears Isaac at age 90, the miraculous fulfillment she'd waited a lifetime to see. So why does traditional interpretation claim that this woman, who waited 6 decades for her son, suddenly became a jealous, petty housewife who couldn't stand seeing another woman's child in her home? That she demanded Abraham abandon Hagar and Ishmael in the wilderness out of jealousy and spite? A woman who demonstrated superhuman patience for 60 years doesn't suddenly become a jealous shrew, unless someone rewrote her character to justify an abandonment. Let's look at what actually happens in Genesis 21. Isaac is born, Sarah's miracle child after decades of waiting. He grows, and they hold a feast at his weaning, probably when he's around 2 to 3 years old. Ismael, now a teenager, about 16 to 17 years old, is present at this celebration. The text says Sarah sees Ismael mocking or playing with Isaac. The Hebrew word is ambiguous and can mean anything from harmless play to mockery. And Sarah's response? According to traditional interpretation, she flies into a jealous rage. She demands Abraham cast out this slave woman and her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not be heir with my son Isaac. The traditional reading frames Sarah as calculative, jealous of Hagar, threatened by Ishmael's presence, petty and cruel, willing to send a woman and child to die in the desert, protecting Isaac's inheritance selfishly, an impatient, faithless woman who finally shows her true colors, and Abraham. He's portrayed as the compassionate one, distressed by Sarah's cruelty, only agreeing because God tells him to listen to her. As if God is endorsing Sarah's jealous tantrum. This reading transforms Sarah from a woman of legendary patience into a jealous housewife stereotype. Think about this. Sarah waited 60+ years for Isaac. She demonstrated faith and patience that defies human understanding. She endured decades of barrenness, social shame, biological impossibility. She trusted God through the utterly impossible. And now, finally holding the fulfillment of that promise, her miracle son, traditional interpretation wants us to believe she became petty, jealous, and cruel. That she couldn't share space with Hagar's son. That she was threatened by a teenager. That her patience and faith evaporated into paranoid territoriality. This is the same pattern we've seen throughout this series. Positive character traits get rewritten as negative ones when they serve the Isaac-only agenda. But with Sarah, they go further. They don't just rewrite one trait, they transform her entire character. From faithful matriarch to jealous villain. From patient saint to impatient shrew. From woman of wisdom to petty housewife. Why? Because they need to justify the expulsion. If Sarah was wise and righteous in demanding Ismael leave, then maybe Ismael needed to leave. But if she was jealous and petty, then Ismael was the innocent victim of a woman's irrational emotions. And this isn't the first time they rewrote Sarah's character. Genesis 16 shows the same pattern. Years before Isaac's birth, Sarah suggests that Abraham have a child through Hagar. This was a culturally accepted practice. Surrogacy through a handmaid was legal and normal in ancient Near Eastern culture, but traditional interpretation doesn't read this as wisdom or cultural norm. They read it as impatience and faithlessness. Sarah couldn't wait for God's timing. She took matters into her own hands. She didn't trust God, so she tried to force the promise through human effort. This reading frames Sarah's suggestion as a failure of faith, as impatience after decades of waiting, as if a woman who waited 60+ years for a child suddenly couldn't wait any longer. Do you see what's happening? Genesis 16. Sarah makes a wise, culturally appropriate suggestion, rewritten as impatient and faithless. Genesis 21. Sarah makes a wise decision, rewritten as jealous and petty. Every decision Sarah makes regarding Hagar and Ishmael gets reframed negatively. Her wisdom becomes rashness, her patience becomes impatience, her protection becomes jealousy. They're systematically transforming a biblical hero into a stereotype of female irrationality. But it gets worse, because they didn't just slander Sarah. They slandered the son she helped raise too.